First of all, really gratifying to see so many faces in the room. This is a pretty phenomenal turnout, and this is obviously a topic that's of great interest to everyone. Kind of the architecture of this deal is the morning is going to focus on trying to describe the magnitude and sort of the taxonomy of the problem here. What is the magnitude of this thing? How is it showing up in the workplace? What is the sort of pain and suffering that our Valley employers are facing? And we'll get at that. So we're on a pretty tight schedule. I'm not going to be able to spin yarns about powder days in 1984. I know that's a great disappointment to many people in the audience, but I'm going to get after the business here. So we have, come to a pretty fascinating juncture here in the Roaring Fork Valley. And if those of us that have been here long enough, I think lived here before we knew the term affordable housing even existed. There was no, in the 70s, we had no organized governmental response to housing. You just kind of found your way and you sifted through sort of the food chain in the housing market. And times have changed drastically. We have a complex economy and we have, dynamic economic, macroeconomic issues that have really impacted our valley. Just to give you an illustration of kind of how complicated this has become, just in our little burg, and I'm serving as mayor for Basalt, which is kind of a mid-valley sort of spot. The issues that come up are housing demand, unit types, average monthly income, AMI, so you're going to hear 10,000 acronyms today, ownership versus rental, new construction versus buy downs. Buy down is, really going to be a big topic today. Should we construct new units or try to purchase deed restrictions, deed impairments that actually would put units into an RO, another acronym, resident occupied kind of status for units, or should we be trying to impose appreciation caps on ownership? So we have new construction versus buy downs, ADUs, what's the role of the accessory dwelling unit? The state initiative, how can we position ourselves to take greatest advantage of Proposition 123 and other kind of state and federal funding opportunities? And then we have the whole, who is housing for? We have this sort of pecking order that, I think we've all followed. We've got a triage system with first responders, teachers, nurses, healthcare workers, area employees, and then sort of regional. So, and then the sort of intractable issue of short-term rentals. So if I went through all the acronyms here with STRs and ROs and AMI and CPI price caps, you get pretty bewildered. So our first panel is going to talk to us about the magnitude of the problem. So this is going to be a pretty numbers-oriented exercise here. But we've got three people who are students of the housing dynamic in the region. Hannah Klausman is the Director of Economic and Community Development for the City of Glenwood Springs. And she's very knowledgeable about kind of the evolution of these housing demand studies that have taken place in the Valley. Matthew Gillen is the Director of APCHA, another acronym, Aspen-Pitkin County Housing Authority. So Matthew lives in the belly of the beast. So he's the guy that deals with this every day and deals with the many-headed Hydra-like nature of the problem that we're dealing with. And Jeff Tripp is from our Council of Governments and has a regional focus on ski country and what the big dynamics look like that are affecting housing demand and availability. So with that, I think we're going to kick it off with Hannah, who's going to talk to us about housing demand studies and just what her perspective is. She is really got a pretty good handle on the whole valley, with particular focus on the mid and lower valley. So Hannah, welcome, and you got the mic.
Thank you. Thank you. A little immobile today. Thank you so much for having me, Bill. And I do have 2 slides that I'll get into. As Bill mentioned, I'm the Director of Community Development with the City of Glenwood Springs, but more so in the theme of today, the hat that I'm representing is actually on the Board of Directors for the West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition, recently formed. So working regionally with the partners actually mentioned in the earlier, jurisdictions and CMC together. So if I could have that first slide loaded. This is going to be incredibly data heavy, and I never thought I'd do speed dating with data, but here I am. Being asked to sum up the housing crisis in 5 minutes is a terrifying task, but stay with me as I try and do that. So while we're waiting for the first slide. Oh, excellent. I can't see it. You can. Great. So the first slide is representing the Greater Roaring Fork Regional Housing Study, which was an effort and kind of the origin of the regional coalition that was started. We got together and really wanted to take a look at the numbers. And so this data was collected between 2017 and 2018. The report came out in 2019. Many of you in this room are very familiar with this report. We use it a lot in the jurisdictions. And so what that really is showing here in the two charts, this is the regional affordability gap. And just for reference, this region included Parachute to Aspen and also parts of Eagle County, Gypsum and Dot Zero. And looking at all those numbers, because we really thought this is the area that's connected. We're all feeding into each other. So you can see the number that gets used all the time is the shortfall of 4,000 units, and that was for 2017. That was what was used as what we needed in 2017 across all of the AMI, area median income ranges. So the graph next to it shows you in the blue what is provided, and then the orange is the color is the gap. And you can see for the region, we have 2,100 units that were a shortfall in the 60% AMI or lower, and then 1,900 units as a shortfall in the 100% to 160% AMI. So really, we were seeing a shortfall in all of those ranges. And this chart represents the region. This wonderful 150-page document also has each jurisdiction that was part of this study to show their specific shortfall and where their shortfalls fall in that income range. Because obviously, Parachute is very different from Aspen. So this is the collective number for the region. And then each of those jurisdictions had their own numbers. So a shortfall of 4,000 units. The increase, as you can see in that second line item on the first chart there, was expected to increase from 4,000 to approximately 6,800 using their modeling by 2027. And isn't that terrifying that that's only 4 years away at this point? So a very large region that we were looking at, and also looking at housing units within each jurisdiction, and then the households that also fall into that income range. So this is a very high-level summary, but this is actually what started us down the path of creating the West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition, this information. So looking at my time, I will move to the second slide. I do not have a clicker. Perfect. So this is an effort by the West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition to supplement that study with pandemic-related trends. I think all the modeling that went into that document was kind of thrown out the window at the end of 2019, and then the question is, what happened? What happened to the numbers? Are they still valid? I think we all anecdotally know what the pandemic has done to the housing crisis. It has increased it, but here's some data behind why. So what we're looking at here, there's a lot of graphs, but we're looking at the average sale price. I think we all know that has gone up in every, across the board for every jurisdiction. You can also see the average rent there increasing. Non-local buyers, that's a very hot topic that gets talked about. How many people during the pandemic bought a second home, moved in, working from home scenarios? This is a number that shows that increase approximately 80%. So if you didn't know that, there's a number to attach to it. Mortgage rates, that doubled. So buying power for any of the houses became a much larger challenge. And then the final point here that I separated is to show how average wages have increased along with those other trends. And you can see that they are lagging behind it. So all of those factors together is what this supplemental document showed us. And I think you can connect the dots as to what that means for the housing crisis. And we were calling it a housing crisis when we did the first study. So we're still there, and it's an even bigger housing crisis with those numbers. It has become increasingly hard for people to afford a housing unit anywhere in this valley. I think everyone here is very familiar with that. So very interesting data that was provided to supplement and show the impact that the pandemic provided to possibly escalate this even further. And that number that I showed you of the shortfall expected to be in 2027, we've likely surpassed that. So 5-minute speed dating on a lot of data. And I will pass it off.
Thanks, Anna. So, I'm sure that number 4,000, frightens everybody that has a perspective of kind of quality of living on this as well. So it highlights, I think, the great tension and the sort of quandary that we find ourselves in is how do we preserve the quality of life and the fantastic sort of access that we have in the valley and address housing at the same time. So that's kind of a quandary, Gordian knot, kind of an interesting deal. So next we're going to hear from Matthew, who is Matthew Gillen, is our APSHA director, managing north of 3,000 dwelling units of all shapes and sizes, and manages what I think could be easily argued as probably the most successful, despite all the stuff we read in the newspapers, I think is easily be described as the most successful affordable housing effort, certainly in Western Colorado and probably in the state, I would argue. So, Matthew, your comments will be much appreciated.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to talk a little bit about APSHA and what we do and what we don't do. And then I do have a couple of good statistics to really, from the APSHA point of view, show the magnitude of the crisis right now. And I'm going to try to do all that by not just talking really, really fast, because that's, my kids tell me that's really annoying. So I'm going to try and make it coherent. So APSHA is a joint venture between the city of Aspen and Pitkin County. They both chip in half the money. I see the two different tables there, so maybe you guys should be nice to each other. And so we're going to carry on from there. So we have a workforce model. So the people in the APSHA housing, they have to work 1,500 hours a year in Pitkin County, live in the unit, and you can't own another house in the Roaring Fork Valley between Aspen and Rifle. So it's really focused on people working full-time in Pitkin County. We have about 3,000 homes, but the ones I really want to talk about are our ownership units, and we have a little over 1,600 of those. Now, the important thing to remember is we don't own the unit. APSHA does not own the unit. We have a deed restriction, which means when the unit is sold, it has to come through APSHA. So remember that. So it comes through APSHA when we do the selling. And there's generally a restriction on the price. It can only go up 3% a year or CPI, depending on what the CPI is. So there's a cap on the price, and that's how we keep it affordable for the next person to buy it. Okay, so what the statistic I'm going to walk you through is for last year, 2022. And this is on our Category 3 and Category 4 units, which are our most popular units, which we sold last year. So remember, we didn't own them. People are selling them through us. So Category 3 and 4, there's a maximum income limit for a family of 4 of $226,000. So a family of 4 can't earn more than $226,000 for a Category 4, and it's $143,000 for a Category 3. So, you know, it's it's a mom and dad with a pretty good job, but they're not lawyers or doctors or anything, so they're doing pretty well. And there's also an asset limit. So when you look at a family of 4, total income limit of $226,000, great. So they're doing okay. We had last year 18 sales listings at Category 3 and 4. So there was 18 homes were listed for sale. How many people do you think wanted those houses? Yeah, I mean, the answer is obviously a lot, but we don't have a waiting list. We do a a bid submittal. So each one, that's who, they see the listing and they want to bid on it. So of those 18 homes we put up for sale last year at Category 3 and 4, our most popular things, we had 900 bids. And if you, and this, I'm embarrassed to admit, I did have to do this on a calculator, but if you do 900 divided by 18, that is 50 bids per unit. So that is 50 different households trying to get that unit during that sale, which I think really shows the demand for affordable housing in Pinkett County. So I'm going to leave it there, and we'll carry on the conversation.
Thanks, Matthew. Jeff Tripp is with our Council of Governments, and this entity has been studying the kind of the housing problem, challenge in ski country. And Jeff, why don't you give us your overview?
Absolutely. Thank you all for having me. This has been a very immersive experience. We're usually on the Western Slope and not in this area, but I had the opportunity to stay in Basalt last night and really feel the effects of the housing crisis going on here. And so I wanted to give a little bit of background about the organization and agency and why we're here. I'm filling in for my executive director who is sick right now, and I hope she gets better. But I really wanted to share a little bit more about our organization and get familiar with everyone in this room, what we can possibly do. So AGNC is the Council of Government, and we promote, advocate, and inform and educate the 4 counties of Moffett, Rio Blanco, Garfield, and Mesa. So we have affiliate counties in Montrose and Delta that we work with as well. So in 1985, AGNC decided to become an enterprise zone. And I think this is a real benefit of us being here, is through that enterprise zone designation, we've been able to establish public-private partnerships by offering 25% tax incentives on top of state and federal tax deductions. So that can be used as a fundraising mechanism to really increase affordable housing projects. With that as well, in 2015, we designated ourselves to pursue a economic development district designation. I don't want to use too many acronyms and too many statistics. I'll try to be easy on everyone because it's going to be a long day. But being designated as an economic development district designation, we are able to pursue federal grants through the EDA, DOE, or any other federal organization to help our really our coal-impacted communities as we transition away from into new or sustainable energy resources. With that in mind, I have a lot of data and a lot of talking points on our region through that comprehensive economic development report that we completed, and we complete just to stay update with EDA every 2 years. I'm kind of a poker. I like to poke at data as opposed to just read a whole lot of data and really digest the data that seem of interest to me. And I'm looking forward to sharing a lot of that about our region because there's it's a heightened aspect here in kind of the heart of the center, which I did not realize was so significant here until I got here last night. So.
Good deal. So that's a pretty good kickoff in terms of the sort of sense for shortfalls and what the scope of the problem is. I'm going to move to another question, and we're going to go around the horn and have each of our panelists kind of weigh in. So the our first question is, could you comment on the impact on critical services and community infrastructure that you're seeing from your perch, from where you guys sit and your perspective on this? So Hannah, we'll start with you.
Obviously, there's a lot of answers to that question. We're seeing a lot of impacts, and I'm thinking back to a story specifically from the city of Glenwood Springs. One of the impacts from this housing crisis is that, as you all know, as you made this lovely drive this morning, people are driving further and further to get to their job. And for our city, you know, we did have an issue where some of our snowplow drivers were actually unable to get to the city of Glenwood Springs due to some other geographic fun that we deal with in the canyons. But because they lived so far, they weren't actually able to get to their job to do that very critical service, as you also experienced this morning, of clearing the roads so that everyone else could get to their job. So when we talk about critical services being provided, the further you have those workers away from where they work, that's going to have, you know, all kinds of things that can happen in between that space that might prevent them from doing that. Obviously, and I think, you know, Jeff is probably more suited to speak to this on the employer and business side, an inability to hire, I think, is impacting everyone in this room. And I could speak to that for a very long time, but I won't do so, because I think you all know and are experiencing that yourselves. When you try and hire for a position, the first thing you actually want to know is where that person's coming from, because the likelihood, if they're moving, that they will be able to find housing is getting increasingly hard at all levels of hiring.
Yeah, I have to second that. Last summer, I think we have a photographic record of this, but there was one point in the middle of the summer where every business on Midland Avenue in Basalt had a help wanted sign. So help wanted signs. The hardware store was all out of them. They didn't have any more of these signs. So, you know, they were on every storefront, and you know, owners who had been kicking back for many years found themselves back washing dishes and bussing tables, and you know, it was a pretty impressive thing to see. So Matthew, what are you guys seeing here?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak more as a executive and a hiring manager than I will as APSHA director, but I think the single most important factor when you're hiring someone right now is, do they have housing? I mean, we've had several vacancies at APSHA recently, and that's been the fundamental question. It's not even a question of, are you getting the right person or the right fit? It's like, where is this person going to live, and can we make it work for them? Also, in my conversations with business owners, when I go out and about, hearing the same thing. This isn't news to anybody. It's the most important thing. People can't hire. They can't make the decisions they want. They're having to settle for people who they might not otherwise want to hire because they can't get in people from outside the community in. In APSHA, for the ownership, when you do the lottery, you get the full validity on the lottery after you've lived here for 4 years. So we are aimed a little bit more at people who are already in the valley, and that's been a conversation we've had on the board for many years, but that's where it is now. So it is very, very difficult for people to hire from outside the community, which I think can only hurt the community.
Yeah, I would like to add on to that. I pulled some reports on Garfield County last night, and it was really striking to learn that Carolyn's here with the workforce. It's about around 3% unemployment in Garfield, which is not significantly bad. The issue is that 40% of Garfield County is migrating or transitioning or commuting outside of the county for work. And that commute is over half an hour, if not more. Again, being immersed and experienced in walking around town last night, hearing individuals say they drive from Grand Junction to here, make that 2-hour trip every day just for work, is pretty significant. And, and to add on to that, with the commute drive compared to the average Colorado commute drive being 25 minutes, I think it's still the 31 minutes is pretty liberal speaking, where it may be much longer than what we realize people are driving to get to work. The workforce is definitely hard because of housing to retain. It's also even harder to attract industries or site selections and bigger companies to come in and set up shop to provide primary sector jobs that will encourage a higher increase in pay to be able to offset some of the costs. It's challenging to attract those companies without that housing there. I also want to add, we had another component of I like to bring them up first because they usually get left behind. There's an aging in place population that we had, that we discussed through our organization of area of aging through Northwest Colorado a few weeks ago in our board meeting at AGNC. And it really highlighted a lot of aspects of 4.4% of individuals will be aging in place, and it's going to take, and also 14.4% of those 75 will need additional, at least one service from AAA at that time. So there is a huge aspect that we're looking at to say maybe we're addressing not only a workforce issue, but a multi-generational issue of students or kids taking care of parents as well as their children. So when we look at the housing crisis, we're looking at it really in a comprehensive way of like what is coming down the pipeline and how can we get ahead of that, because those costs and the services will really increase for the Asian population as we move through the next 4 years, as Hannah mentioned as well.
So, there's some mythology that has been around for a long time that, and it sort of goes like this, that, if just Aspen would take care of its own employees, this housing problem would just go away. It's just really, the Upper Valley's really got to step up. And, well, I don't know, 3,200 units seems like a pretty good start at this. And I think the nature of this problem is far bigger than trying to put a finger on one locality. But I guess the question is, are we all feeling this? Is this an Upper Valley problem? I think what we're trying to do here is set the stage for getting an understanding that this is broad and complex and affects basically every settlement in Western Colorado. But Hannah, your views on it?
Sure, and I've certainly heard that before as well, and I think our regional efforts are showing that that's just not the case, and there's more data to show that. Aspen has obviously been shown as someone who is importing workers, but Glenwood Springs also showed up as one of those that is importing as well. So it's not just Aspen, it's not just Glenwood. We have people commuting from Grand Junction, so Grand Junction is also feeling it. So I think we're feeling it equally, but in slightly different ways. The Colorado River Valley is experiencing all of their residents leaving and commuting an hour to half an hour if they're lucky, up Valley. Glenwood is experiencing the traffic that comes along with that, and everyone that's continuing up the valley is also experiencing those choke points, as I experienced today. So it's good to have that perspective. But so we're all in this at this point, and I think that's one of the big changes. We might have been operating in our own silos before and making good efforts at it, but we're so connected in this way that we're all feeling it, and we all have to work towards it.
It's not all demand is not coming from Aspen employers. You have your own indigenous kind of.
You're trying to get me to have the quote in the front page of the paper tomorrow, but I'm not going to do it. No, not just Aspen, and that's why we have the regional study, and I think the data from 2017 as well as the supplemental data shows that we're all in this problem together.
Okay, excellent, thanks. Matthew, your thoughts?
Well, I am one of those people who drives from Garfield County to Aspen every workday, so it's not fun, but it's beautiful, so I don't complain too much. But you do see people driving up and down the valley. I feel like that's all people do is drive up and down the valley, either for work or to do errands. So I think it's definitely something to bear in mind. It's no longer it's a valley-wide problem, which needs a valley-wide management. You've got to be very cognizant of that. It's no longer a situation where you can, where lower valley places can be seen as places where you can get a cheaper housing. It's just not possible. I was house shopping in Garfield County, and it was kind of shocking. But there we go. I just wanted to hit a couple other things while I have the mic. APSHA's talking about retirement. We're very aware we have to maximize the APSHA value and really make use of all that space we have and really for the community maximize that. So 2 summers ago, APSHA increased the amount of time you have to live in an APSHA property before you can retire into that property. It went from, I believe, 3 years to now it's 10. So you have to be in the APSHA property for 10 years, and then you can hit full retirement age. You sometimes hear this myth that you can just retire into an APSHA property whenever you want, and I just want to make that very, very clear that you can't. That's a fairly strict rule. And then hopefully we'll get into a bit more later in the conversation, but we're really trying to maximize our use of bedrooms and looking at different ways to right-size that equation to people who have spare bedrooms, might want to move into a place with smaller bedrooms. But that's a bit of a tangent, but I wanted to make sure I got it in there.
Thanks. Jeff, thoughts?
Have a lot of thoughts covering 4 counties. Yes, we have that underlying thread of the housing crisis, but every county is different and facing their own challenges. With the increased overall, I think we've seen a 17.5 increase through June of 21, a decrease of 46% just in Mesa County. Rio Blanco really has been hit hard. Rio Blanco has most of their land, at least half of their land, 50% of their land, public owned. So when we talk about development, it's a little bit challenging in their region to pursue. Garfield County, high housing costs is a main factor. I also like to add that, again, the primary sector jobs being transitioned or moved away. The oil and gas, I know, there's impacts there, but it is a primary sector driver, and coming up with solutions to move into a sustainable, renewable energy source or provide primary sector jobs for Garfield County is pretty significant. And at that point, as of before the pandemic, it was oil and gas made up 33% of Garfield County GDP. So with that moving away, it's really has causing a lot of havoc, and all the way down here, probably what you're seeing to Parachute and Aspen. Or Aspen, I should say.
Okay, we're going to move to a kind of spicier question and conclude with this one for our panel. So, we've done a lot. This is in the news every day. We're all working. And are we all working in silos? Is there a better way to coordinate our efforts and make sure that we're making most efficient use of grant dollars and finding sensible land use solutions to housing? So the question that we're going to talk about next goes like this. Has the public response been adequate? And do you believe that solutions are in the pipeline, or do we need new approaches? And I would like to just highlight that with a hopeful note that probably everyone in the room is aware of, but I'd have to acknowledge Mr. Dave Myler's in the audience, but we now have a very hopeful start with the West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition. And I think at last count, every one of our local governments in the Roaring Fork Valley have contributed pretty robustly to getting this agency up, getting some legs under it, and qualifying. We'll have some real throw weight with all of these governments working together in the valley. So that's underway, and I just want to make sure we're all aware that's kind of in the works. But it would really be kind of really helpful to hear from each one of you guys about what our sort of public policies have been. And later on, we're going to have a panel that's going to talk about this from a business perspective. So, and it really brings to the surface, whose job is this? Is it the employer's responsibility? Is it local government? Who is going to deliver this housing? And, we've got 2 more panels. Our next panel, we're going to talk about where the rubber meets the road. So we're going to talk about the transportation agency. We're going to talk about the school district and the hospital. So if these guys are stressed out, I think you're going to hear, we've got a problem on our hands here. So at any rate, this is a discussion about the governmental response and where we are. Do we need a louder wake-up call here?
Thanks, Bill. We are all stressed out, yes. Something that's pertinent to this conversation, I just received a text, and for those of you that have signed up for emergency notifications if you are a commuter, you realize I-70 eastbound just closed at Glenwood Springs, 116. And guess what that does to everyone that's commuting? I'm glad that didn't happen this morning, but just to bring that home, that's been a very frequent occurrence as well. So a lot of workers unable to get to where they work because they are commuting so far, and that reverberates up the valley. So small side note, back to the spicy question that we have. Public response, has it been adequate? You know, with the West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition, the people that get together in that room, I am always so impressed with what they're doing in their individual jurisdictions. It is very impressive. People are working very hard to try and tackle this housing crisis from a jurisdictional response of writing code and coming up with creative policies, hotel conversions, if you want to throw out a spicy word there, and getting very creative in how we can address some of these immediate impacts in our community. But then also, what's been great about this regional approach is we're able to fill in some of those gaps that the individual jurisdictions are not able to do. So has it been adequate? You know, I hate to say that it hasn't been. We've all been working very hard, and I think we are getting creative with new solutions, such as the regional approach, to address some of these in a different way.
Great response, thanks. Matthew, we recognize your employers are sitting out there in the audience, so, you know, we understand if you're going to have to hedge this a little bit, but
You mentioned employers, so I did want to circle back on that and just talk about how ABSHA has approached that historically. So I mentioned it's full-time work in Pitkin County. You'll notice that I'm not tying that to a specific employer or a specific industry, or really, it's really on the person. And historically, ABSHA has really tried to harken back to the goals in the Aspen Area Community Plan and in the City of Aspen Affordable Housing Strategic Plan, and that is to make this a lived-in community of choice, and that means Rachel Richards, who's on the City Council, often uses the problem of not turning this into a company town. We've not tied housing specifically to specific jobs or specific industries, and that is a conversation that bubbles up every now and then, and it's a very important conversation. Right now, that's not what we do, because it's based on individuals coming to the area and living a great life and trying to make that happen for them, and then the community benefits flourish from that. I think once you start tying it to a specific industry or company, that's a very different conversation, and it's not where we want to go right now. And if the community changes their minds through elections or whatnot, that's different. But right now, that's not what we do. And I also want to talk briefly about the local government response. I think it's very easy to say, yeah, we all need to work together. Of course, that's the solution. But I just want to say something very basic, and that is, it's really hard. And it's really hard because, from my point of view, my funding comes from the City of Aspen and Pitkin County. It doesn't come down valley. So I have a responsibility to spend that money to the citizens of Pitkin County and Aspen. And if at a higher level there's a different decision to spread that around a little bit, great. But right now, the money is coming from certain people, so those people are who we're representing. So you have to live in Pitkin County, you have to work in Pitkin County, and we don't have a mechanism right now for somebody who'd wanted to work, live in ABSHA housing but work down valley. Should that change? Maybe so. But right now, my responsibility is to the taxpayers of Pitkin County. So, good luck with that one.
thank you. Jeff, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah. I think that's where AG&C can come in and collaborate and become a fiscal agent or a sponsor to really kind of blur the lines to get initiatives and solutions brought to the table in a regional aspect. We realize that is a challenging aspect in itself, to work in your own silo, because that's where your funding streams are. But AG&C, as a council government, has that flexibility to really allow things to happen. So maybe not too much, but we can work through some things. The aspect for the public response, it seems as though even though over the past fall there was a lot of voting on really suggesting tax increases on short-term rentals and excise taxes across the whole region. I think the voters are starting to speak on what they want to see and how they want to see it, and really it can be deliberated or discussed afterwards whether it's actually impactful, but we're really starting to see some initial highlights of a public response on trying to solve the housing crisis to create funding for affordable housing, or I should say attainable housing. I'm a small kid from North Carolina, and I don't think I've ever been around so much money in Aspen, but it's so interesting to see what is defined as affordable. And I think the community needs to define that and really see what responsible real estate development looks like. That really defines or matches the definition of affordable and attainable as well.
All right, great. Well, thank you. I think that's going to conclude our first panel, and thank you guys. Really helpful perspectives, and appreciate the help.